The defining factor of a story's quality can often come down to the quality of the villain and how much the audience can empathize with them. Villains with goals that an audience can relate to, or villains that have become the way they are for an understandable reason, these kind of nuanced antagonists can either carry an entire anime if they're done well, or they can sink the whole story if they're not. A protagonist isn't a hard sell for the audience. Protagonists have the entire story to win over the viewer with their heroic acts. But villains, with their limited screen time and differing morals from the average viewer, really need something special to make the audience care about them. In many cases, a nuanced, well-written villain will be what separates a good anime from a great one. But sometimes, you don't want a grand piece of literature that makes you question all of your ethics and preconceived ideas about morality. Sometimes, you don't want a deep, well-layered villain like Griffith or Askeladd. Sometimes, you just want a batshit insane villain that exists for no reason other than to be an unlikable prick that the heroes get to beat the shit out of. For as much praise as the more vulnerable and human type of villains get, I think a lot of people can ignore what a villain is actually meant to be. While I generally prefer a story with a more nuanced villain, not every story needs a morally grey one that the audience can empathize with. Villains like Aizen, Sukuna, Dio, or basically every JoJo villain, are not lower quality characters than someone like Johann Liebert, because they serve the purpose that the author intends. They are massive dicks that the protagonists get to go kill. While complex villains are usually great and lend to a deeper, more philosophical story, I've always had an affinity towards a more unhinged villain with almost no redeeming qualities. And when it comes to unhinged villains, no anime does it better than Yu-Gi-Oh! Yu-Gi-Oh!, even as a premise, is utter madness. It's a story where the fate of the world depends on a card game based on ancient Egyptian rituals and monsters. Pharaohs from thousands of years ago are unironically playing life or death card games against some of the richest and most powerful people in the world. These people having become so rich and powerful due to their affiliation with the card game, by the way. A guy that designs technology to play this game has the influence to shut down an entire city just for a card game tournament. He also travels around in a jet shaped like his favorite dragon. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is fucking stupid. So for an anime with such a ridiculous plot, do you need a nuanced and layered villain opposing the heroes? Of course not. You need someone so insane that even the fucking Dragon Jet guy can look at them and be like, hey, maybe this guy's a bit too crazy. And Yu-Gi-Oh! Delivers by giving villains so unhinged they make people like Hisoka or Dio look downright rational by comparison. Characters like Marik, Pegasus, Bakura, even the enemies from filler seasons like Darts or Kaiba's dad. They might have massive monologues explaining why they're doing things, but at no point do the protagonists or the audience ever stop and think, hey, this guy might be onto something. They just think they're sadistic weirdos that need to be deleted from existence.
Did somebody say fine-ass madness?
Marik is the villain I think is most unhinged of the lot.
What, you f*** me? I f*** me.
Marik starts out pretty low-key and is happy to do all of his work from the shadows, even keeping his identity hidden for most of the story. But once Marik snaps, he fucking snaps. It is actually the funniest thing that all of the characters are just chilling on a blimp, playing a card game while this raving lunatic is just hanging there with them, throwing his tongue around and talking about how he wants to murder everyone. Instead of actually doing anything about this guy to maybe keep people safe, everyone just tells him to keep it down because Yugi and Kaiba have a fucking duel to finish. A character like this could never work in a serious story, but in Yu-Gi-Oh!, he just feels like he fits. Because if he wasn't distracting the audience with his antics, then they'd start to question how ridiculous the plot really is. Pegasus didn't have the same crackhead energy as Marik. He was much more of a man's man.
He was that man's man and that man's man. He belonged to all kinds of men.
His unhinged aspects were less about murderous insanity and more about his bubbly, eccentric attitude in the face of some pretty dark actions. At the end of the day, Pegasus was just a strange guy that missed his wife and thought that killing a bunch of people with cartoon dragons might bring her back. Finally, we have Bakura, who is basically the main antagonist of the story and has the closest thing to an understandable goal out of all of the villains, seeing as how his entire village was massacred. But like, come on, man. That happened 3,000 years ago. At a certain point, you have to let it go. He also has his unhinged moments, like this one that didn't even make it into the anime, and overall was just that creepy guy in the background for most of the story. Even the heroes are fucking sociopaths in Yu-Gi-Oh! If you've read the manga or watched Season 0, you'll know that Atem would just mindfuck people for a laugh, until Yugi had to ask him nicely to stop being such a dick. And Kaiba is such a ruthless business mogul that he drove his dad to unalive himself, and then bankrupted a dude just so he could get a Blue Eyes White Dragon card. I'm not even going to get into all of the ancient Egyptian fuckery in the show, because my point is, Yu-Gi-Oh! Only works as a concept because the characters are utterly unhinged. The ridiculous plot of the anime can only seem reasonable because the characters are more ridiculous. And this is where the later arcs of Yu-Gi-Oh! Went wrong in my opinion. Yu-Gi-Oh! GX really is underappreciated in my mind. The last 2 seasons of the anime are not only the best Yu-Gi-Oh! Has ever been, but I consider them good even compared to other anime. But I think GX's issue mainly comes down to the fact that the characters are just too normal. The premise of the show is a bunch of people in a university to study a fucking card game, yet the characters are just normal. They don't have jets shaped like dragons, they're not dressed like BDSM fashion models, they're just regular teenagers. And when you contrast the insanity of the setting with how stable and balanced the characters are, it causes you to question the stupidity of everything, especially in the first 2 seasons. Season 3 and 4 are so good to me because the story managed to be good enough to overcome the hurdle of the ridiculous premise. But it still seems out of place to have all of these pretty normal characters doing such ridiculous things. GX didn't have a villain like Marek that could balance out the plot. The main villain by the end was Judai's fucking depression. But despite all of these issues, I like Yu-Gi-Oh! GX a lot, although it could have used a bit more Bakura. Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds is where I think Yu-Gi-Oh! Lost its way entirely. For an anime where they play card games on motorcycles, everything just felt too grounded. I'm sure there was a good story in there somewhere, but it just felt so silly to try to present a story about class warfare and police brutality against the backdrop of fucking card games on motorcycles. Full disclosure, I only watched the first 50 or so episodes of 5Ds, but the way the plot was heading, I really don't think I would start to enjoy it more later. Plus, they completely butchered my girl Aki. For all of the series after 5Ds, I've only watched bits and pieces, so I can't really comment on the quality of those stories, but I'm pretty sure they never got back to the roots of the original Duel Monsters. Yu-Gi-Oh! Will always be an important anime. A lot of Western anime fans would have been introduced to the medium because of Yu-Gi-Oh! And I think a big factor in its appeal was how over-the-top crazy the characters were, especially the villains. I love a villain with relatable goals and moral layering, but I think more people need to appreciate the strength of an unhinged, sadistic villain, and how they can fit into the story. Maybe if the Hunter x Hunter anime ever comes back, we'll see a return of Hisoka profile pics on Twitter. Thanks for watching, subscribe for more weeb shit.